this lesson, we'll focus on MongoDB integration. MongoDB is among the NoSQL cloud databases. So we'll start by signing in. Inside the MongoDB Atlas, we'll be able to see some of the projects we have. If it's your first time, you'll need to create a new project and enter a project name. Inside here, once you have a project, we'll be able to see some of the databases that we have by clicking Browse Collections. And for me, I have examples here, but I can create a new database and call it task list dartfrog or dfrog, and define a collection name, and let's call it task lists because I'll give it the name lists because we'll be focusing on the lists entity as well in this lesson. And then you can add additional preferences. You don't have to. Let's just create it. Now we have our database created, and we have a collection here. So another thing we need to look at is the database access. You need to create a database user that you can interact with. So all you have to do is click on add new database user, enter username and enter a password. And that's the one that we're going to use within the application. Now let's dive back into our application. The first thing we'll do is we're going to install the MongoDB Dart package. So we'll install it by run pub add MongoDB, and then we're going to head over to our roots. We're going to create a new root inside the DB folder, and we'll start by first creating the middleware as we did in Firebase. So we'll just proceed to enter the command dartfrog new middleware db MongoDB. So we'll find that we have our new folder created and it has our middleware. Let's proceed to work on our middleware. So our middleware will also have the same syntax like the one in Firebase. So we'll start by entering return context async, and then we're going to define a DB instance, a DB class, which we'll find in the MongoDB package. So we'll just define a variable called DB, and then enter a await, call the DB class, capital D, small b, dot create. So we're going to come here and import the package. That's why it's not detectable. MongoDB, and then we're going to define. So here we need to pass our URI string or our connection string, and to find it, to get it, we're going to go back to MongoDB Atlas, and in our database, specifically AppSec, we have this button called connect. Click on it, and then we'll focus on this section, drivers, and pick a specific this connection string. So let's copy it, and then we'll modify it a little bit. So back to our application, just paste it there. Now the username is whatever you created as the new database user that you created, or if you have an existing one, you can set it up here together with the password. And then after .NET, we're going to add in the name of our database, which was task list dfrog. Just paste that there. And then we can remain with the rest of the parameters after it, and then just enter the username and the password here. Let's add a semicolon. Needs to be a single quote. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is check. We'll first define or open a DB instance by running await db.open. But what we want to do also in the handler, as we did in Firebase, is we want to check if db.is connected or is not by passing the exclamation. That's when we open it. But if it's already opened, if there's an instance already available, we proceed to use that instance. Next, we're going to define our response. Final response is equals to await. We'll use the handler and we'll also use the use method. And inside this use method, we want to inject this instance of db using the provider. Define of type db. And then we're going to pass our db variable. Like that. This is equivalent to passing in this example. We passed context inside here. It's the same thing as writing it like this and then calling the context. Still the same thing, so you can use either or. Just wanted to use that to show an example. Then next thing, after getting the response, we return the response. But there's one important thing we need to do before returning the response, which is let's close our db instance. And that's simply what we need to add in our middleware. Next, let's now work on our root handlers. So inside our MongoDB folder, we want to create a new root. So we're going to define it as run the command new root db MongoDB, and it should create an index.dart. Great. Now let's work on our root handler. In this root handler, we're going to focus on two request methods, a get and a post, to represent C and R in CRUD operations. So let's clear this. Then we'll proceed to run our regular return switch. So we'll use the switch case to check on the HTTP method that's passed. And inside here, we're going to, our first case will be HTTP method.get. If it's a get, we're going to run a specific method called get lists, and it will require the request context as the parameter. So we need to call this and pass it context. Next, we're going to, our next case will be HTTP method.post, and we're going to define a variable for it, a function for it, sorry, and call it create list. Simply as so. Then we'll copy this and paste it here, and it's also expecting our context. Then let's set our response as a future, like so, and then pass in a sync. Then we have our default case where we will define the response and pass in the status code as HTTP status dot method not allowed. We'll find this in the library.io. It's passing the semicolon. So we are done with this. Now let's work on our get lists. So in our get lists, we'll define a variable called lists, and then we're going to pick the DB instance that we injected from the middleware by entering context.read, define the type, and then with the instance now we want to let's import MongoDart library. Then we need to define our collection. So we already named our collection as lists, and then we just use the find method to go and pick all the list objects, all the objects inside that collection, and convert it to list. as async. And now that we have that, we just do a return and return our response.json, specify the body and pass in lists to string. Now let's work on the create list method function. So we'll pick the what is passed in the we'll pick the body, what's passed in the body, that is by entering context.read.json, context.request.json, and cast it as map string dynamic. Let's define add async here. Then we're going to proceed and get the name from the body by specifying the key name and cast it as a string. Now that we have the name, let's create a simple object called list, or variable that will be on type map string dynamic, which is equivalent to a JSON object because MongoDB can only store JSON-like objects. So string dynamic, and then we specify the key and pass our variable. Now that we have that, we need to now push it or write it to our collection. So what we do is just call context dot. So we're using context just to read the DB instance that we have within the application. Then dot collection, we specify our collection name, and then we call the method insert1 and pass our list variable. Now that we have that, what is returned is an object, and in that object it will hold the ID of this new object, new document that we have created in our collection. So we just want to get that by initializing all this that we have done into a variable called result, and then we're going to now return a response.json and define our body by passing a map string or a JSON object. Pass a JSON where we pass the ID will be the result.id. That's where we get the ID of the new document that we have created. Now that we have that, let's test it on our terminal. First, let's run the dev server. It's running. Great. Let's proceed to our terminal. Inside here, let's call curl request get URL db MongoDB. And it returns an empty list. So let's try and add post, and we have our db MongoDB, and we have a body that holds a name of a list. Let's enter. And it returns the ID of our new list. Let's try and pass in a get request, and it will display for us the new list that we have created. So our operations are working. Just a quick one, friends. If you're passionate about mobile app development or just getting started, please subscribe to MOBETERST Studio and join our community of app enthusiasts. It does mean a lot. And if you like my free content and tutorials, you can also support me with coffee. Thank you. Let's proceed back to our application and work on the remaining two, which is U and P, update and delete. We'll create a dynamic route for them. So we'll just enter frog, new root ID. And here it is. Let's minimize this and work on our operations. So we'll proceed to do the usual. Return switch pick context dot request dot method. And inside here we're going to specify HTTP method dot patch. That's what represents the update. So let's create a function for that. Future response update list, and we'll need two parameters, request context and the string that represents the ID of this list. So let's pick this, paste it, and pass in the context and the ID. Let's just convert this response to future and pass in async. Okay, that sync shouldn't be there, it should be here. Sync. Then let's handle the other method, which is delete, and let's define its function, which is delete. Let's copy this function here and pass the context and the ID. And lastly, let's handle the default case, which will be future.value, and we define our response, which will hold a status code of http status.method not allowed, which we'll get from the library.io. Great. Now let's work on update list. So we'll do the usual, get whatever is passed in the body by running context.request.json and cast it as a map string dynamic. Then we get the name from the body by passing in the key name and cast it as a string. Next thing, we're going to now get our instance, our DB instance, specify, let's import MongoDB, specify our collection, which is lists, and then update using update 1. And this is where we'll specify the where is equals to, so where the ID is equals to the ID that the variable ID that we have here, and then we want to modify. So we modify dot set the field name to the name that we have. There we have it. So there's once we do this, we also, what we simply want to do is return a response status code http status dot no content. Wait, async. Great. So we just pass that. Please, you can also do handling where you just run a try and a catch. This is just a simple way to understand the I'm just making it as simple as possible, but again, we can actually, let's just add the try and then do a catch. If there is an error, we can pass in .bad request, and since yeah, basically that's that. So we can test with that. Next, let's do the list, delete list. Inside here, we're going to just call the instance. So let's pass async. We'll call the DB instance that we have injected. Define the collection and call delete one and specify ID. This should be in like that, and then we register a callback, and inside here we'll just return response status code http.status.no-content, and then let's add the semicolon, but we also want to add something else, which is on error, to handle any errors that we may experience. Just run return response status code http status.bad request. Just copy this because it's expecting a return, and if it's unable to reach here and here, it definitely has to be a bad request of some sort. Now that we have this, let's run this in our call request, in our terminal, sorry. So back to our terminal, let's just enter call request patch. So we have an old we have an existing call request here for patch. We just need to replace it. This was for Firebase. Just say db MongoDB. Oops. And then let's pass an ID, and since we already have some value here, we'll pick this, copy, and then we paste it here, and then we are going to, currently it's being called personal, let's change it as is, personal stuff. Enter and see. Oh yeah, there's a, it's actually wrong, and we need let's remove this backslash. And also let me run the development server. It's running, so let's try again. Wait, it hasn't, just a minute. Clear this, let's try again. Okay, now it's running. Let's try again. We are experiencing an error. Let's see what's wrong. Future dynamic is not okay. I think this one. Future dynamic is not. Patch. Update. So we missed out on one keyword over here, which is await. Very important. Okay, now let's try again and see. Great, so no content, no error. That's a good sign. So let's try and get and see if our information has been updated. It was initially personal, so we expect it to say personal stuff, so it hasn't yet updated. Let's see what the problem is. Back to our application, so we're going to do a small change. In that, the way we had coded it, we were depending on the object ID that MongoDB generates. Let's try and generate our own ID for the object that we're creating inside our MongoDB. To do that, we'll have to move to the index.dart where we are creating a list. Instead of just passing the name, let's also pass our own unique ID for our object. And if you've been here since the beginning of the tutorial, you understand that we created a type of file and a type of method called extension, called hash string extension. It's an extension method. So we're going to use this to generate a unique ID for us. So we'll come here and define a variable called ID and use the name to generate an ID. And then we just pass in the hash value function. Now that we have that, we just copy this, and other than the name, let's also pass an ID and pass our own ID instead of depending on the one that MongoDB has created for us. Now with that, we'll proceed to our dynamic root, and inside here now we're going to be checking where ID, our key, there's a key. It will check through the keys where ID is equals to the ID that we're going to pass here. And also I think it's going to affect the delete whatever we did here. So let's do the same. Let's now use the ID that we are storing ourselves when creating the list. So let's create a new list and see how that will work. So we'll just say call request post. So inside here, other than since the ID we're going to generate it from the name we give it, so let's just define a different name like shopping, and enter. There we have it. We have the new ID. This is specifically for MongoDB for the new object that we have created. Let's pass in a get request and see the lists that we have created so far. So we have personal, the one that we had initially, but now it's not holding the structure that we need. The shopping one now is the one that's holding the structure that we need. So it's holding an ID, and this is the ID that we have created, and it's also holding a name. Great. So now let's proceed to update, patch. And what we're going to pass here as an ID is this ID that we generated. So we'll come here, delete this, and paste DB, MongoDB. We'll just copy this, paste it there, and then we're updating from shopping to shopping stuff. Let's enter and see. So it's going to depend on the ID that we have set for ourselves. Root not found. Let's our root is very wrong. So we have DB, MongoDB. Let's delete all this. then we should have the ID, and this ID is what we have created for ourselves. So there's no error that has come in. Let's try and pass in a get and see if the changes have been reflected. And there we have it, shopping stuff, it has been updated. So let's do a delete. Cal request delete. Place it with the ID of the object that we want to delete. Man, let me just copy it from here. Copy, paste, and enter. Let's proceed to check using the get request. And as you can see, our shopping stuff list has been deleted, so we are good. So this is another way. Having your own ID and generating it uniquely for yourself is actually good, because you might want to define how your IDs should be generated. But there's also the ID that comes with MongoDB itself. Now that we have completed that, we have done the CRUD operations for MongoDB, and we have been able to see how to use the middleware and be able to configure our database inside it. Now let's proceed to the next database.